Congress has let us down. At least it appears that way. I know times are tough, but what is it exactly that drives public opinion in this direction? You remember our course organizer? Let's take a look at that bottom portion there of little Peopleville. So remember that all the people in that town, representing of course the US population, are socialized. They have been brought up in homes, around families and schools, in cities and towns that have helped them to form certain ideas about the world and about the government and about how the government should behave and how policy should be made. And so that is what we call political socialization. We're going to talk later about the role that media also has on the way we see things. So before we talk about what we think, let's see for a minute who we are. First, it's interesting to note that the America of today and that of tomorrow is not the same as the America of yesterday. So you can see from that last slide that the largest growing group is the Hispanic population in America. That's due largely to immigration, and immigration policy thus is going to be influenced by that. One of the problems is that politicians are extremely worried about offending one group or another because they know that they are going to be elected or not re-elected by those individuals. And so the last time anything major has been done with immigration was 1986, although we have seen little attempts to try to show that President Bush and President Obama are tough on immigration. They'll do some employment raids, usually right before the election. So the demographics have changed in America, but we've also seen a big shift regionally, and this has a lot of factors involved with regards typically to where the jobs are. But what effect this basically has on policy is that the census happens every 10 years, and at this census they look at the population, and you know that the population is what determines how many people are in the House of Representatives for your state. And so we can see in this next slide how that kind of affects the country. So this is from the 2010 census, and you can see that after that census was taken, there were more people in southern and western states and less in Midwest and eastern states. And so that's reflective in the numbers of representatives from each state. It's pretty significant that breaking things down by age, the biggest group of people we have is the old folks. And that's significant because they're retiring and they need Social Security. Now, in theory, the Social Security money that they paid from their paychecks all their life would be there for them to have as a supplement to their income. But of course, Congress didn't save that money. They spent it, and now they expect us to pay for those folks. So we are going to use our Social Security money for them, but there are less of us than there are of them. So we're going to be in a deficit by, the next 10 or 20 years. And that's something Congress is going to have to figure out. So you've heard the adage, like father, like son. Same rings true for politics. If your family's Republican, it's most likely that you'll be Republican. Same with the Democrats and the Independents and the like. Now we know that kids spend more time watching TV than they do at school, and certainly more than they do talking to their parents over the dinner table. And these figures are a tad old. I would probably say that now we can include into mass media not just TV, but time on the internet, on your cell phone. And so wherever you're getting your information, it's coming more from electronic media than from people in your direct life. So I guess the question is, what are you guys spending all that time watching? The median age for watching the nightly news is 61, so that's probably not what you're watching. And whatever you're watching, is it teaching you about what's going on in the nation and the world and helping you form educated public opinion? I know what you're thinking, Mr. Fry, how do we know what people will watch on TV? How do we know what they think about politics? Well, that's where polling comes in. And the way polling works is you take a sample of, say, 1,000 people, and you see how many people are black or white or female or male or Democrat or Republican, and then you just multiply that by a figure to make it represent the whole population. It's surprisingly accurate. The error is usually plus or minus 3%. Keep that in mind when you see a poll that's like, 47-53. Well, that 3% is really up in the air, so to speak. There are obvious times when polls can fail. If we look at 1936, there was a 19% differential in what the polls said and what happened in the election, and that's because they were using the phone books and DMV records to contact people. Well, you can think of 1936 during the Depression that a lot of people did not have phones or cars because of tough times. Today, the big significant error might happen because they're still using landlines to contact people and ask them questions when the vast majority of folks, including young people, you guys, use exclusively cell phones. There are some benefits to having polls, such as it helps the president and other public figures to kind of see if the direction they're taking the country is the direction that the people want it to go. And it helps them to make corrections, particularly when elections are coming up. And that kind of leads us to maybe some of the detriments, is that often politicians are more concerned with making people happy than really leading. And as we can see here, the bandwagon effect is also a factor, whereas people watch polls and they say, well, if everyone thinks that way, then I probably should too. So they can actually drive public opinion. And of course, no president would admit to following polls. They want to be seen there as the leaders, but they still see that there is a good use for polling. Did you know you could even have polls the night of an election? Now you're wondering what kind of purpose would that serve? Well, we're pretty impatient folk here in America, and so we can't wait till the next morning for results. So what happens is every 10th person that leaves the polling place are asked who they vote for, and then of course they compile the data, do some math, and then they tell you, based on what we've seen so far, it seems like Obama is going to take Nevada, or whatever. The way a question is worded in a poll also makes a huge difference. So we can see here is the example of what do people think about gays serving in the military. And on the left we can see that that particular question yields a 70% favorable rating, whereas on the right, simply changing it to a couple of words will show a much lower score. So that's a pretty important deal. We need to be careful and pay attention to that when we're looking at poll information. So, to summarize, we got a lot of things that shape what we think politically. Our parents' influence, our friends, media, polls, and it ends up with us having hopefully a set of ideas. We know where we stand on some issues. Here you can see some of the generally held beliefs of liberals and conservatives on those different issues. And there's also something that we should examine, which is different folks in America and their levels of participation based on a couple of factors, which we'll see here. You probably notice a couple different things here. First of all, there's a general trend that the more money people make, there on the x-axis, typically the more they're likely to be engaged civically. But you notice there's a stark contrast as well between the money donated there, the red line, and doing things that take a lot more effort and time, like signing petitions, attending meetings, and contacting politicians. So there's something about that. Perhaps there's a correlation with higher income and education level, or possibly that you pay taxes and therefore you're more worried about where that money goes. But consider some of that stuff and we will talk about it tomorrow. Farewell.